Good evening and welcome to This Week in Turkey. The NATO summit held in the UK on December 3 and 4 in honor of the alliance's 17th anniversary has ended with the release of the London Declaration. While the declaration puts emphasis on unity and the fight against terrorism, President Erdogan and Turkish representatives held meetings with European leaders and US President Trump regarding Syria and Turkey's border security.
The London Declaration, issued by the heads of state and government participating in the summit, has underlined that terrorism in all its forms and manifestations remains a persistent threat to us all. Before the summit began on December 3, a joint meeting on Syria was held by the leaders of France, Germany, the UK, and Turkey. All attacks against Syrian civilians, including in the rebel-held area of Idlib, must end. The leaders of Turkey, Britain, France, Germany agreed. Leaders praised the quadrilateral meeting, with German Chancellor Angela Merkel reporting that it was productive and useful. President Erdogan said after the summit that the discussion went well. French President Macron, on the other hand, said, although there are still uncertainties regarding Syria, there is a will to prioritize the fight against ISIS. This is important to me, Macron said. Asked about Erdogan, Macron said, I had the opportunity to meet him personally. I respect everyone. You didn't hear me disrespecting someone. Everyone takes responsibility. I think that Turkey is a big country. I have deep respect for the Turkish people. Before the summit, US President Trump showed his support for Erdogan, indicating that he likes good NATO member Turkey and gets along with the country's president. Erdogan and Trump held a one-on-one meeting on Wednesday during the summit. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, Minister of Finance Berat Albayrak, Minister of National Defense Hulusi Akar, former Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım, and presidential spokesperson İbrahim Kalın were also present at the meeting. The two presidents discussed the importance of Turkey fulfilling its alliance commitments, further strengthening commerce through boosting bilateral trade by $100 billion, regional security challenges, and energy security, a White House spokesman said, while Turkish Presidential Communications Director Fahrettin Altun praised the meeting as being very productive. When asked about the meeting with Erdogan, Trump said, it was a very good meeting. We discussed Syria. We discussed the Kurds, Trump said, adding that Turkey has been doing a good job as a NATO member. The border and the safe zone is working out very well, and I give Turkey a lot of credit for that. The ceasefire is holding, Trump said. That border was a mess for a long time, he said, adding, we have soldiers where the oil is, and that's the way I like it. Trump also added that Turkey had brought the Russian missile system because the Obama administration refused to sell the Patriots, stating that both parties are still discussing it. Following the summit, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that Turkey approved the NATO defense plan for the Baltics and that it did not demand anything in return. Ankara had previously threatened to refuse a NATO defense plan for the Baltics and Poland if the alliance failed to designate the People's Protection Units as a terrorist organization. Stoltenberg stated that the issue of how NATO should designate the YPG was not discussed at the summit.
This evening I have Soli Özel, lecturer at Kadir Has University, on our Skype line. Good evening, Mr. Özel. Thank you for joining us. I cannot hear Mr. Özel. Mr. Özel, can you hear me?
I can, all right.
Wonderful. Now I can get your voice. So, Mr. Özel, as we heard in our news video, before the summit, President Erdogan threatened to veto the Baltic Defense Plan if the YPG was not recognized by fellow NATO members as a terrorist organization. However, this did not happen, and Erdogan actually agreed to the aforementioned plans. So what did Turkey achieve beyond making itself appear the uncooperative actor within the alliance?
Well, to begin with, I've just read an article preparing for your show, which suggested that, yes, what grabbed the headlines was the threat, or the way it was presented to the Turkish media, the threat that Turkey would block the new plan for the Baltics and Poland. But apparently when the president spoke about that, he also inserted a clause saying if it's brought up in the debates, if it's brought up on the agenda. So I suppose nobody brought that up on the agenda. Therefore, there was no need to discuss whether or not there should be a quid pro quo. So it was a very subtle thing, I suppose, but the way it was perceived, not just in Turkey, but all around the world, was that Turkey was threatening to block what was a very important matter for NATO. In fact, the involved countries, the Baltic countries and Poland, which have been far more sympathetic towards Turkey than other members lately, but in the European Union as well, felt offended and I suppose had some harsh feelings for Turkey as well. But at the end of the day, yes, nothing really happened. In that sense, Turkey appeared as having threatened to do something and not having done it. And it didn't appear as if it hadn't done it because of alliance solidarity, but it hasn't done it because it had no friends inside that would support him in its stance, and possibly because it did not have been able to get the recognition of PYD-YPG as a terrorist organization by other members, including the United States, by the way.
So let's put it this way then. How was the summit for Turkey? What did Turkey achieve? Was it a positive experience overall for Turkey?
I don't think it was necessary. I mean, except for this, what may be considered in retrospect a bluff, and the fact that Turkey appeared to be bullying others, it didn't really lose anything. It's far more important for me, maybe you'll get to that, was that the meeting of the four, Britain, France, Germany, and Turkey, prior to the NATO summit about Syria, really didn't go anywhere. It broke off very early. There was really no common statement and stuff. But I must also insert another point of information, and I was aware of Sinan Ülgen, a former diplomat, published an article in the journal Foreign Policy 2 or 3 days ago, in which he makes the point that, in fact, in 2016, there was an agreement on recognizing the PYD as a terrorist organization as part of a larger package of things, and it is really the Americans that have actually reneged on that. So maybe Turkey did not bring it up the right way, but according to his article, and I suppose his sources were reliable sources when he wrote that, and I think there was also a document, that issue has actually been brought up, and the Turks were under the impression that there was some agreement. I think we need more clarity on that, and I suppose maybe some journalists could dig up and go further than what Sinan Ülgen has written in his piece on that particular issue.
Right. Speaking of Syria, President Trump actually justified Turkey's actions in Syria, as well as even going as far as even defending Turkey's purchase of S-400s. President Trump supports President Erdogan, but we know that Turkey is not seen very sympathetically in the U.S. Senate. So what do you think will happen to Turkey's position within the NATO if President Trump is not reelected in 2020?
Okay, I mean, to continue first with your earlier question, that is, what did Turkey get out of this summit? It got another unconditional declaration of love and sympathy from President Trump, and in fact, Trump even justified Turkey's purchase of S-400s by his predecessors not allowing the purchase of Patriot missiles by Turkey. That's a debatable issue. I don't think it was entirely correct. So that's what Turkey got out of that. And he got also a delay. Turkey also got a delay in discussing the S-400 issue, which NATO, I think, declared that it would not allow the integration of that system into its systems. But the debate on that particular issue has also been delayed further. So Turkey gained time for about 6 months. In fact, this is also what President Erdogan has said, but not about S-400s, but about the PYD-YPG issue. That is, we'll talk about that 6 months later. As for the discrepancy of positions between the U.S. Senate and President Trump, I just don't know how long President Trump can go on covering for Turkey. And I think the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has just declared that next week he's going to bring the issue on the agenda, or he will pressure the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to actually put that on the agenda. And then we'll see what Senator Lindsey Graham, Trump's closest ally, I suppose, in the Senate when it comes to security matters, what he will do, because as with Trump, it's very difficult to figure out what exactly Lindsey Graham thinks, because he blows cold and warm, hot and cold when it comes to Turkey. But this week may turn out to be critical in terms of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee bringing up the S-400 issues. Therefore, sanctions against Turkey might actually be brought about. Finally, the short answer to your question on what happens if President Trump is not re-elected, there will be nobody to protect Turkey.
And as we know, Turkey has also a long-standing relationship with Russia. President Erdogan and President Putin are set to meet again in January 2020, and it was reported recently in the Russian news agency Interfax that Turkey and Russia are working on a new contract for a second batch of S-400s. So how sustainable do you think is this dual-track relationship Turkey has both within NATO and with Russia?
Look, to me, it doesn't really look sustainable, but quite frankly, it looked totally unsustainable in June of 2019, right? The U.S. Congress and in fact the U.S. administration or elements of it declared that if Turkey purchased these systems, then sanctions would be coming up. And then it was, well, if you bring them in, they will be operationalized, and then if you open the packs, and now if you operationalize them. So there is a high degree of unseriousness in the American position. So they kept on backtracking. So I guess the Turks believe that they can push the envelope further. Still, I just don't think this game of trying to open up space for Turkey by playing Russia against the US and vice versa can be sustained for a lot longer. Moreover, I think Turkey must have concerns, just objectively, it must have concerns about the fact that Russia now does dominate the Black Sea. In fact, before relations got as close as they are now, President Erdogan is on record for having declared that NATO was actually asleep. He didn't say brain dead, but he said NATO was asleep in that Russia turned the Black Sea into a lake, into a Russian lake. And so Turkey must be concerned with the fact that Crimea has been annexed. Therefore, there are missiles in Crimea, there are missiles in Armenia, there are missiles in Syria that the Russians have deployed. The Russians have now inherited the bases that the Americans have built for themselves. So in a way, from an objective geopolitical standpoint, Turkey must feel uncomfortable that it is actually being surrounded by Russia, which after all still remains the number one designated rival, if not the enemy, of NATO, of which Turkey is a member.
Speaking of NATO, and you kind of alluded that earlier, there's this brain-dead expression that has been going around first by President Macron concerning NATO, and then in turn President Erdogan said that about Macron. And later General Haftar, the leader of the Libyan National Army, also said that the agreement signed between the government of Nation Accord and Turkey was brain dead. Can you maybe outline the actors within Libya? And also...
I think, I mean, maybe the Oxford Dictionary will choose brain dead as the word of the year. I don't know. Macron has popularized it. Now everybody uses it, and I guess it will run out of fashion soon. But of course, in the Libyan case, the general has condemned the agreement because he does not recognize the legitimacy of the government, which everybody else recognizes as the legitimate government of Libya. Certainly Turkey does. And as well, probably he would not have signed a similar agreement with Turkey. Therefore, he's also giving the signal that should he ever come to power, should he ever win in the civil war in Libya, that agreement probably will not be valid. So this was a warning shot, and an agreement cannot really be brain dead either. But that's again, I take the expression more as a metaphor. As for the agreement Turkey signed with Libya, obviously the two countries, which are not actually very close to one another, have designated a rather large space, and actually crossing, I guess the line crosses Greece's Crete Island as well, have designated for themselves a pretty large economic zone, exclusive economic zone. I don't think other Mediterranean countries are likely to recognize this. I just read a piece suggesting that some Greek commentators think that this may actually escalate, and maybe the chance of a spark between Turkey and Greece, that there is a chance for a spark and maybe skirmishes between Turkey and Greece, and if this escalates, maybe a naval battle or something. I doubt that we would go that far. President Erdogan and Prime Minister Mitsotakis did have a meeting, a bilateral meeting in NATO, where I suppose they have discussed all those things, and I haven't read so far any alarming statements from the Greek side, but once this is digested further, maybe in the next few weeks, we will hear more about it. I guess the Greeks would go to the International Court of Justice, or they would have recourse to legal procedures first, and then we'll see what happens. But obviously that agreement with Libya has a lot to do with the existing disagreements, threats, bluffs, and tensions in Eastern Mediterranean because of the energy sources around the island of Cyprus, about which the Cypriot government that is recognized, the Greek Cypriots, make decisions of their own without regard for whatever the Turkish side thinks, and Turkey does not recognize that. So it is complicated, and I don't believe any of the parties are managing this the right way. It's a very explosive situation, potentially.
Thank you, Mr. Özel, for your assessment of the NATO summit.
Thank you for having me. Night.
Former HDP co-chair Selahattin Demirtas was taken to the hospital on December 2, nearly a week after losing consciousness due to chest tightness and inability to breathe.
Complained on social media on December 2 that the former HDP co-chair had still not been taken to the hospital despite losing consciousness on November 26. The prison doctor wanted Demirtas to be sent to cardiology, neurology, and gastroenterology departments. We, as his lawyers, asked for his immediate dispatch to a hospital, Aygül Demirtas said. However, Demirtas hasn't been sent to a hospital even though 7 days have passed. The fact that he's not sent to a hospital, despite such a critical health condition, means that he's being kept under life threat, she added. Just hours after Aygül Demirtas tweeted the information, Demirtas was taken for a checkup to the Trakya University Medical School Hospital, where he saw doctors from the cardiology, neurology, gastroenterology, and chest disease units. All the necessary tests were conducted and he was brought back to the jail. As of now, no life-threatening symptoms have been detected. The HDP said shortly after that Demirtas was taken to hospital after the party deputies Erol Katırcıoğlu and Necdet İpekyüz visited Demirtas in prison, saying that Demirtas doesn't blame the prison administration regarding him not being taken to a hospital. HDP party deputy Erol Katırcıoğlu conveyed the former co-chair's remarks regarding how he feels. Let my people know that I have a disease. It worsened under these conditions. It needs to be treated, Demirtas told Katırcıoğlu. Meanwhile, main opposition Republican People's Party decided to send a delegation to Edirne F-type prison to check on Demirtas's health. Speaking on behalf of the delegation after the visit on December 3, CHP Vice Chair Veli Ağbaba said that they had seen Demirtas in a good state of health and in a good mood. Demirtaş told the delegation that he was not experiencing a problem with the jail management and the delay in his transfer to a hospital was attributable to the Justice Ministry. Ağbaba said that Demirtaş's illness is quite serious, but Demirtaş himself does not want to be considered eligible for release based on this illness. Demirtaş says, "Even if I die, I do not want to be released because of this reason," Ağbaba said, referring to the fact that there are thousands of sick patients in Turkish jails who are denied release.
Sixth hearing of the lawsuit filed into the suspicious death of Şule Çet was held at the Ankara 31st Heavy Penal Court on December 4.
The court sentenced arrested defendant Çağatay Aksu to an aggravated life sentence and 12 years and 6 months in jail on charges of deliberate killing, aggravated sexual assault, and deprivation of liberty. Aksu's sentence, however, was decreased by the court over good conduct from aggravated life sentence to life in jail. Berk Akand, the other arrested defendant, was given 18 years, 9 months of jail time over accessory to murder, aggravated sexual assault, and deprivation of liberty. Umut Yıldırım, the attorney of the Çet family, has indicated that they have welcomed the verdict, but they will appeal against the good conduct given to defendant Aksu. The hearing was attended by the arrested defendants and their attorneys, the family of Şule Çet and their attorneys, and several women's rights defenders. Gathering in front of the courthouse before the hearing, Ankara Women's Platform, women's assemblies, and representatives from several other women's rights organizations opened banners that read, "Not male justice, but real justice," and "Justice for Şule Çet." Şule Çet was a student at Gazi University studying textile design. She suspiciously lost her life after falling off the 20th floor of a high-rise building in Ankara on May 29, 2018. Aksu was Şule's boss. He had hired Çet as an assistant and later fired her from his business. On the day of Çet's death, Aksu and Akand invited her to dinner to talk about her working situation. Later, they went to Aksu's office for after-dinner drinks, where the incident took place. Both Akand and Aksu claimed that Çet committed suicide and said that she was not a virgin in a bid to clear themselves of rape charges.
Ceren Özdemir, a 20-year-old university student, was stabbed to death in front of her house in the Black Sea province of Ordu on December 3.
Özdemir was attended by paramedics after the murder. She was taken to Ordu University Training and Research Hospital but died after surgery. Police launched an investigation into the murder and collected security camera footage from surrounding workplaces. On December 4, Özgür Arduç was identified as a suspect and he was caught by police forces in the house he was hiding with the murder weapon in his possession. Arduç stabbed the police officer when taken to police headquarters for questioning. He confessed to killing Özdemir, stating he had followed her. In his statement, he further stated that he wanted to kill again, but did not have the opportunity due to his detention. It was revealed that Arduç had murdered a child in Ordu 14 years ago and had only been caught in 2018. He escaped from prison on December 1, 2 days before murdering Özdemir. Özdemir was a third-year student in the Department of Music and Performing Arts at Ordu University. Violence against women is in grave levels in Turkey, with at least 430 women killed in the past 11 months, according to the statistics shared by We Will Stop Femicide platform.
Turkey's economy grew 0.9% year-on-year in the third quarter, in line with expectations. Meanwhile, the country saw a 10.56% annual hike in consumer prices in November.
The growth in the Turkish economy breaks 3 consecutive quarters of contraction as it shook off a recession which followed last year's currency crisis. The third quarter growth was driven by the agricultural sector, which expanded 3.8%, while industry grew 1.6% and services grew 0.6%. However, the construction sector, which underpinned years of strong economic growth in Turkey, shrank 7.8%, the Turkish Statistical Institute data said. The government has forecast 5% growth next year, and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak wrote on Twitter that leading indicators for the fourth quarter showed growth momentum was continuing to increase. Turkey's inflation rate is expected to hit 12% this year, as laid out in the new economic program for 2020 to 2022 announced by the government this September. In its latest report, Turkey's central bank last week cut the country's year-end inflation forecast from 13.9% to 12%, in line with the government's projection. Meanwhile, the country saw a 10.56% annual hike in consumer prices in November. The highest price increase on a yearly basis was recorded in alcoholic beverages and tobacco with 33.35% in November, according to the Turkish Statistical Institute. It was followed by education at 14.35%, miscellaneous goods and services at 14.03%, health at 13.85%, and hotels, cafes, and restaurants at 13.07%.
Turkish Airlines has restricted its alcohol beverage service to its economy class passengers in international flights. The restriction has entered into effect as of today.
The airline will no longer serve rakı, gin, and vodka to economy class passengers in international flights taking less than 6 hours. A single brand of vodka will be served to passengers in flights longer than 6 hours. The decision in question has been taken as part of Turkish Airlines' savings measures. Further, Bilal Ekşi, the CEO of the Turkish Airlines, has claimed on Twitter that 27% of unruly passenger incidents are caused by drunk passengers. Turkish Airlines completely stopped serving alcoholic beverages to its economy class passengers in domestic flights in 2013.
After a year-long break, the 10th Which Human Rights Film Festival is going to be held from December 7 to 11 in Istanbul, Diyarbakır, and Batman.
The festival was forced to take a break due to lack of funds in 2018. This year, however, it is back, with programs in Istanbul, Diyarbakır, and Batman. The festival includes 34 documentary films and a series of workshops, forums, and panels. The festival is guided by Eduardo Galeano's question, if the world is upside down the way it is now, wouldn't we have to turn it over to stand up straight? The festival aims at joining the voices that continue to demand fundamental rights, which are the only things to keep the world on its feet.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.